Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar, Revitalizing Our Cities, How Foundations and Grantmakers Can Invest in a Better Economic Future. Our webinar today is sponsored by Venable and the Forum of Regional Area Grantmakers. I'm Bob Waldman, Managing Partner at Venable. It goes without saying that these past few months we've witnessed unrest in our cities, and the philanthropic and business community clearly want to respond and help, but are not sure how to go about doing that. There's some question whether the old traditional grant-making models work or are they still the best practices. Today we're thrilled to have three experts with three different perspectives joining us. We'll be joined first by Tracy Carty. Tracy is the Director of Social Investments at the Annie E. Casey Foundation. Tracy is responsible for developing, coordinating, and managing the Foundation's $125 million social investment allocation. Her work encompasses all areas of social investing, including program design, developing investment strategies, underwriting and structuring investments, and portfolio management. In addition, Tracy works closely with Foundation program staff to educate them on social investments and to identify potential investment opportunities. And Tracy will be speaking to us on some very practical examples of how grant makers can help our cities out. Next, we'll be joined by Otis Rowley. Otis is the President and CEO of Newark Community Economic Development Corporation, which serves as the primary economic development agency for New Jersey's largest city. In this role, Otis brings almost 2 decades of community and economic development leadership experience. Prior to joining the Newark Community Economic Development Corporation, Otis led the Urban Redevelopment Division of UPD Consulting, a public sector firm based in Baltimore specializing in a breadth of services, including education, accountability, housing and human services, community and economic development, data warehousing, and public-private partnerships. Otis also has an extensive background in civic engagement, including serving as chairman of the board for Community Building and Partnership in Baltimore, and he served on the boards of Charles Village Community Benefits District, the Municipal Employees Credit Union, the Penn Lucy Action Network, the Baltimore City Small Business Resource Center, and the Charles Street Redevelopment Corporation. And Otis will speak to us about the needs of the cities and how the philanthropic and business community can help our cities out. And finally, we'll be joined by Yossi Ziffer. Yossi is my colleague here at Venable, counsel in our tax and wealth planning group, focusing his practice on the full array of tax, corporate, and strategic needs of tax-exempt organizations, including public charities, private foundations, hospitals, schools, and trade associations. Yossi will be speaking on some of the legal rules that come into play when grant makers try to assist our cities. To ask questions during this webinar, please use the chat feature on the left of the screen. We'll answer questions at the end of the presentation. So with that, let me turn this over to Tracy to start out.
Thanks, Bob. It's my pleasure to be here this afternoon to talk about how the Annie E. Casey Foundation utilizes social investments, and in particular, how we have used them to invest in one neighborhood in Baltimore. I wanted to start with a little bit of an overview about the foundation. It was established in 1948 by Jim Casey, who's the founder of UPS. Annie E. was his mother. Our mission is to build better futures for vulnerable children and their families. And in addition to the grant making that we do, we have, as Bob mentioned, a sizable allocation to social investments. We really see these as another philanthropic tool in our toolbox to complement our grant making. We have allocated $125 million of our endowment for these investments. So for us, it's really about how do we maximize the assets that we have in pursuit of the Foundation's mission. I will talk in more detail about our place-based investing, but we also do thematic investments. So for example, currently we have a portfolio of $95 million in 28 different investments. These are below market rate loans, loan guarantees, as well as equity investments. more than half of them are in fund managers that reinvest in specific targeted activities. So for example, we invested in a fund manager who does micro enterprise lending in San Antonio, Texas. But for today, I'll talk about our direct investments that are very much focused on place. We have 12 in our portfolio currently, and 6 of those are related to our work in East Baltimore. The East Baltimore Revitalization Initiative was launched in 2001. It was the largest urban redevelopment effort in the city of Baltimore since the Inner Harbor was redone in the early 1980s. There's a neighborhood immediately adjacent to the Johns Hopkins Medical Campus that was really one of the most distressed in the city. It had a 70% property vacancy rate, which was significantly higher than the citywide average, and the neighborhood also exceeded city rates for families living below poverty and other indicators such as distress indicators, including crime. The initiative focuses on an 88-acre site immediately adjacent to the Johns Hopkins Medical School. It had an initial $1.8 billion budget and a goal to transform the neighborhood into a mixed-income community. The project strategy centered on 3 distinct objectives: to capitalize on neighborhood strengths, acquire land and responsibly relocate residents, and then to create opportunity for those residents. With Johns Hopkins as the anchor institution, the project was meant to take advantage of its proximity to a planned major biotechnology center. The city used eminent domain to obtain properties, and there was an emphasis throughout on relocating the displaced residents in a way that didn't leave them in a position that was worse than what they were currently experiencing. And finally, the project was envisioned to create opportunity through substantial redevelopment, including 1,200 units of mixed-income housing, job training to prepare local residents for jobs, and a new land use plan and physical infrastructure that was designed to make the area more attractive to businesses and residents. Ultimately, the project was to offer new homes, improve schools and safety, create new retail outlets, and more opportunities for residents to be engaged and employed. Now, a project of this scale requires many different partners. In addition to philanthropy, the community, as well as state and local government, are significant partners in this effort, as is, of course, Johns Hopkins University. The project has a private sector master developer, and then early on it was recognized that in order to maintain momentum and see the project through to completion, that a new entity, East Baltimore Development, or EBDI, needed to be created. Casey came into the project after much of the initial planning work was done. We were interested because Baltimore is our hometown, and we were committed to the city, even though we work in communities across the country. We also have a significant amount of experience in working with residents on neighborhood transformation, and we knew we could be of value in using that expertise to maintain the focus on the residents and ensure that an already vulnerable population would not be at increased economic vulnerability despite the required relocation. So in late 2002, the Foundation joined the initiative to help ensure it was implemented in a manner that protected the interests of the area's low-income residents and taking steps to minimize the negative effects of the relocation while creating positive opportunities for the families that were living in the project area. The Casey Foundation was committed to using resources beyond its grant budget in this work, including our staff who took on leadership roles as well as provided technical assistance. And then this work was also bolstered by our commitment to maximizing our assets in support of our mission. Going into this, we knew that we were going to take a very active role, but we also knew that we didn't have the assets necessary to really do everything. So we came in with a 2-pronged strategy to leverage our resources. So first, we wanted to attract other foundations and stakeholders with capital to the effort, and then we wanted to leverage our own grant commitment of $20 million to create increased availability of funding and strengthen EBDI's balance sheet so that they were a sustainable organization. Like most large-scale redevelopment efforts, the East Baltimore Initiative required a mix of public financing to set the stage for redevelopment, so land acquisition, relocation, public improvements. It also required financing for new and improved community infrastructure and private financing for buildings, such as the Biotechnology Center. It was clear the initiative could not succeed if it had to wait for annual appropriations from federal, state, and local governments. So Casey stepped in to help find new financing to bridge the gap. There were three New Markets tax credit transactions that we participated in, and those totaled $50 million all combined. Casey's role, with the help of EBDI, was really to leverage the foundation's assets to secure these new funding streams, and they in turn netted EBDI more than $13 million in equity. However, these tax credits early on were for projects that were uncertain. There were a lot of risks associated with a speculative project, and it made tax credit investors concerned about the level of risk involved in the project and the potential for a default from EBDI, which was a relatively new entity at the time. So Casey provided a guarantee not only on the tax credits but also against the recapture risk. And at least in the first transaction, that risk was shared by other stakeholders, including Johns Hopkins. The proceeds of the first two financings were used to pay for property acquisition, demolition, site preparation, and property maintenance in the Phase 1, which was a core 31-acre area that was targeted for initial redevelopment. And the third transaction was used to partially finance the construction of a new elementary school and early childhood center in the neighborhood. This actually turned out to be the first new public school facility in the city in something like 20 years. Ultimately, Casey has invested more than $100 million in loans, loan guarantees, and bond purchases in support of the East Baltimore Revitalization Initiative. Our most recent loan was a bridge loan for the development of the new school. These transactions, in turn, have leveraged more than $300 million in funding from public sources, philanthropic, other philanthropies, as well as the tax credit sources. And I think we've seen some fairly substantial results to date. The residents, we feel like, were successfully relocated. There has been a significant investment in new infrastructure development. There's new housing. There's new office space, and in addition to the new school, which is up and running. And even though Casey has been involved in this and the work has been going on for almost 15 years now, there continues to be more work to be done. So this year we're focusing, in the coming years we'll see new housing and retail services developed, as well as office space. And next year we're focusing on the development of a community park that was part of the original land use plan. I wanted to wrap up with just some key lessons that we have learned through the 12 years that we've been involved in East Baltimore, specifically related to the financing. The financing structure has to be flexible and based on the evolving circumstances of the project and market conditions. As the East Baltimore work evolved, so did the financing needs of the project. It was influenced and shaped by the collapse of the real estate market in 2008, which required new strategies for preserving momentum and advancing the initiative's goals. Second, federal and state tax credits and local public financing are critical to projects of this scale. Without the New Markets Tax Credit Program and Baltimore City's tax increment financing bond, the project would have stalled. Casey's guarantees and its willingness to be a patient investor helped launch the financing and secure the financial strength of EBDI, as arm's-length institutional investors would not have been willing to extend credit to EBDI without Casey's backing. And this leads us into the fact that we really went into this as a venture capital investor. We saw ourselves as a partner in every way. On the finance and investing side, we were analyzing each transaction to understand the probability of having our capital returned or the possibility that our guarantees would be called. And we mitigated some of that risk by taking a leadership position on the board of EBDI, of having our voice heard and push for the social return in terms of how the capital is spent to achieve the neighborhood revitalization and ensure that low-income families and children end up with a nice community that offers them opportunities. This approach is really beyond what you typically see in a program-related investment relationship, which is usually a lender-borrower relationship. But we felt that going into it, we knew we had to be a long-term patient investor, and the way to support that was through the human capital as well. And fifth, innovative financing needs to be based on expert financial and legal analysis. We wanted to make sure that we were doing things in a way that aligned with and was compliant with the governing law. And then finally, a word on the partnership. It wouldn't have worked if the various parties that came to the table hadn't have bought into a common vision. But what was more important beyond that buy-in was that we built trust among ourselves and among the community. And we had to really work hard to overcome our preconceived ideas about what folks were bringing to the table and what one another's institutional constraints would be. So that concludes my remarks, so I should turn it over to Otis.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm excited to talk to you a bit today from a little different perspective. As an individual who is often going to NEKC and others to seek funding and support, I wanted to talk to you today about philanthropy in Newark, New Jersey, and both what the philanthropic community has done and what they can do to be supportive of the revitalization of the city. Many of you may or may not know about Newark, but Newark is New Jersey's largest city. We have about 278,000 residents, 26 square miles, relatively small city, but largest in the state of New Jersey. And we have about 50 Fortune 500 companies, the third busiest seaport in the nation, and one of the most active airports in the nation. There's a lot going on in our great city, but there's also a number of challenges that Newark has faced, up to and including trying to move beyond the past history of the riots of the 60s. In fact, next year we will be celebrating actually 350th anniversary. We are America's third oldest city. But in talking to you today, I want to focus in on the three areas where we believe the philanthropic community can have the greatest impact and has had the greatest impact to date. Mayor Baraka is really kind of focused in on community economic development, education, and public safety as really the kind of three legs of a stool that hold up the city and that will support and buttress the city as we move forward. And the picture that is on the slide that you see in front of you are four very important images that reflect some of that community economic development investment that has occurred. The first picture is a rendering of the Nina Simone House. It is a former bank building that is in the South Ward, a challenged ward in Newark, New Jersey, that lay vacant for over 40 years. The mayor, who is in his 40s, has said he does not remember a time when it was occupied. He doesn't live far from it. The Newark Community Economic Development Corporation, the Economic Development Corporation that I have the privilege of leading, is leading the redevelopment of the facility. And what is going to occur is that we will have 27 units of artist housing and artist kind of performance space and commercial space on the first level. And this project obviously could not be done given the market realities without investments from the philanthropic community as well as some of the social investment dollars that we have received. Immediately to the right of that picture is a cluster of 5 pictures that represent the commercial storefront program. The city of Newark is in fact doing an entrepreneurship boot camp in one of each of its 5 wards. This 16-week boot camp whose goal is to really equip entrepreneurs to build wealth and create an opportunity for them to bring diverse retail to the communities that they serve. At the conclusion of the 16 weeks, we are doing an incubator a retail incubator that houses up to 10 to 15 of the retailers in each of the 5 wards. This was made possible by an investment from the Wells Fargo Foundation as well as obviously some city dollars. But it was seen obviously as an investment and not just a grant, because this is in fact equipping Newarkers to start their businesses and making sure that we set them up for success. Under the Nina Simone House, you see a picture of dark fiber that's been lit up, and the city of Newark has some of the best kind of fiber optic infrastructure in the country. We have actually the fastest public Wi-Fi in the nation, which many are not aware of. The Newark Venture Partnership is a $50 million investment fund focused in on growing the technology industry in the city of Newark. This once again could not be done without an investment from the private sector, from social investment dollars, as well as some philanthropic support. What we will be doing through this is creating an access to capital, technical assistance, and an accelerator space, and allowing people to grow their businesses and truly kind of build the Newark economy. And then finally, what you see in the lower right-hand corner is the 20-story Prudential Tower. Prudential, of course, Prudential Insurance is headquartered in Newark, New Jersey. They've been there for over 100 years, and they've expanded into a new 20-story, 740,000 square foot building for an additional 1,000 employees. They did not move from their old tower. They added additional 1,000 employees. This was particularly exciting because of the fact that the growth did not require any tax abatements or incentives that often are the case in some of our urban centers. But what's equally attractive about this is the overall investment that the Prudential Foundation and Prudential Social Investment Program is doing throughout downtown. Tracy talked a bit about some of the social investment dollars and how by providing those low interest loans and access to capital, particularly in areas that traditionally it would not occur, really can be transformative. And that's happening in and around the Prudential Tower in downtown Newark. We have a new Nike store, a new Starbucks. There are hundreds of units of housing and commercial space and thousands of square feet of commercial space that, but for the social investment dollars from Prudential and from others, could not occur. And the main point that I want to make, particularly around the community economic development focus here, is that the philanthropic community can be most supportive if you are looking for cities where you are going to have the most return on investment. Clearly, I'm biased, and I think that Newark is top of that list, but I think there's also empirical data to back that up. But as you are looking in terms of matching both your grant dollars as well as your social investment dollars, thinking in terms of the jobs created and the sustainability of that investment, it makes it can have the greatest impact in terms of truly revitalizing our cities. Briefly, I want to also just talk to you about some of the other investments that the philanthropic community is making in the city of Newark through social investments and direct investments. The Summer Youth Employment Program and post-secondary access, we have greatly expanded on our summer youth employment program. Previously, we had employed about 1,500 children. This year, we did over 2,500 children. And what's really exciting about these summer jobs is that it's not just about giving them a job, but exposing them to opportunities and providing them with financial literacy. And this is a different approach, not just kind of picking up trash, but also really changing their prospects on life and how to manage their dollars. 66% of the youth that participated this year actually said that they have a better understanding of how to create a budget and how personal finance really can impact what they do and how they do it. Once again, this could not have occurred. That expansion could not have happened if not for partnerships and if not for philanthropic support. We are also have opened up the Centers of Hope, which are 9 community-based centers in all 5 of Newark's wards. 4 of the centers have already opened, and they're focusing in on young women, special needs, entrepreneurship, arts and athletics. It's really trying to have a comprehensive, holistic approach. Once again, this is the direct effect of philanthropic support and social investment. Our public safety work and the Newark model neighborhoods really Mayor Baraka looked at the two hardest hit wards and focused in on the neighborhoods within those two wards, and we have identified them as model neighborhoods, and we're doing a comprehensive approach to attacking the challenges and the issues that have helped to lead to some of the public safety issues that are affecting those communities. And we have been able, due to the philanthropic community stepping up, to have a community street team to do direct access, direct connection to those individuals whose lives are being impacted within the community. Also, public safety summits to talk about best practices and to find out from the community how to resolve some of the challenges that they are facing. My Brother's Keeper in Newark is part of the national kind of White House My Brother's Keeper network. We have outreach to all of the city's comprehensive high schools, and we've been doing a series of roundtables, forums, and outreach. And really, particularly in light of some of the things that we've learned outside the city, including here in Baltimore, doing direct interventions to connect the law enforcement community with the youth community to have conversations about how to improve relations and how to improve communication. And then finally, we've been using philanthropic support as well and social investment now also to improve on the education in the city of Newark. Many of you are obviously, I was widely heard about the Zuckerberg investment in the city of Newark and some of both the benefits and challenges connected to that investment. We are fortunately also now moving towards local control. The state, after controlling the school system for over 20 years, has recognized that it might be helpful for the local community to support it, and we're in the midst of that transition. And there are a lot of best practices that we have learned in regards to community schools and how that wraparound service, those wraparound services go a long way to ensuring the educational attainment and success of the students that we serve. The focus obviously here is just on community economic development, public safety, and education. And the work that we are doing and have been successful in the city of Newark could not be possible without philanthropic support and very strategic social investment. And we hope for that investment to continue. And with that, I'll turn it over.
Thanks. So, we've now heard both from Tracy and Otis about really a wide array of different ways that charities can get involved in social investing, program-related investments, and the like. And now I'll take a few minutes just to speak about, from a tax and overall organizational standpoint, how can a charity go about involving itself in some of those opportunities. And really, when we talk about program-related investments for charitable organizations, as we've heard, there are multiple angles or lenses through which to view those opportunities. On one hand, the organization may ask itself, is this investment beneficial to our organization from an economic standpoint? Does it represent a good investment of our assets, balancing risks and rewards? That's on the economic side. But at the same time, there's also a programmatic question. Is this investment consistent with our overall charitable purposes? And in analyzing various opportunities through those lenses, sometimes they'll reach the same conclusion. Maybe an investment offers neither economic or programmatic benefits. That's a pretty open and shut case. You walk away. On the other hand, if an investment offers both, low risk, decent return, and it's thematically consistent with an organization's purposes, that's great. But the most interesting examples arise when these two analyses sometimes pull in different directions, and that's what I'd like to speak about against the backdrop of some of the applicable rules. Now, when you speak about program-related investments, that as a term of art under the tax law, that applies primarily to private foundations. But colloquially and in the marketplace, you certainly hear a lot about all forms of 501c3 organizations, including public charities, involving themselves in program-related investments. And it's worth it just to take a moment before we get into some of the more technical rules to take the sort of wide-angle lens view of what's involved there. Besides the issue that we discussed a moment ago, the economics and the programmatic benefits, for 501c3 organizations, there's always a question of not only what benefit does an investment offer to our organization, but what other interests are being benefited by our involvement. And one of the core fundamental principles of being a Section 501c3 charity is that the organization's activities should not result in undue benefit to private interests. Rather, taking a balancing approach, a charity's activities must predominantly benefit the public interest, and any private benefits should be only incidental. And so that's a preliminary question for an organization to consider when making an investment. Are the terms fair to the charity, and on the whole, is the opportunity one that predominantly benefits the public interest? And to that end, an organization should certainly make sure that its decision-making process is one that complies with both IRS law as well as state law considerations pertaining to fiduciary duties. And that involves making sure that the organization has full and accurate information and that there are no conflicts of interest that might arise between the charity's involvement and interests of insiders to the organization. Because if an investment were to ever come under scrutiny, whether by the IRS or a state attorney general, really the first thing that will receive the most attention is the process by which the organization elected to enter into this transaction. And to that end, it can sometimes be advantageous to form a committee of the board that's composed of experienced volunteers and professionals who are best equipped to guide the organization in analyzing the prospective opportunities, weighing the particular characteristics involved, and presenting those to the board for its informed consideration. Now, as I mentioned before, the term program-related investment, or PRI, really arises under the tax law within the broader scope of rules that apply to private foundations. And really, there are a series of rules that apply to private foundations, and one under Section 4944 of the Code pertains to what's called Jeopardy Investments. These rules that apply to private foundations really originate from the standpoint that private foundations are typically funded by a limited base of donors. And therefore, the organization is not inherently accountable to the community as a whole. Public charities who live based on constantly making the case and appealing to a broad base of donors are sort of always have their feet held to the fire because their donors want to know, what are you doing with my contribution? How's that project coming along? And there's a built-in enforcement mechanism there. Private foundations, on the other hand, where all or most of their support comes from a very limited donor base, don't have that inherent accountability to their donors, and therefore the IRS and Congress come and impose certain rules on private foundations to make sure that the foundation assets are being used in furtherance of charitable purposes. And this concept of jeopardizing investments is one of those rules. And what it says is that a private foundation should not invest its assets in a manner that is unduly risky, that would jeopardize the foundation's ability to act in furtherance of its charitable purposes. And if if the IRS were to determine that a jeopardizing investment was made, the foundation itself would be subject to an excise tax equal to 10% of the amount involved. And additionally, the board members, the foundation managers who knowingly participated in the making of that investment could also be subject to personal excise tax liability as well. It's worth noting on that point that if the recommendation of foundation managers to enter into an investment was based on reasonable cause, then even if the investment was ultimately determined to be a jeopardizing investment, they would be absolved of their personal liability. And if the foundation board relies on or what's called a reasoned legal opinion from counsel that the investment does not jeopardize the purposes of the organization, that would be deemed reasonable cause, and the foundation managers would be able to avoid the exposure to personal liability. But again, as stated, the overall purpose of these rules is to make sure that the foundation's assets are invested in a generally responsible and more or less conservative manner so that they remain available for the charitable purposes of the organization. Now, against the backdrop of those rules, this concept of a PRI operates as an exception. And what the tax law says is that if an investment qualifies as a PRI, then even though it may bear certain hallmarks of risk, if it meets the criteria of a PRI, it will not be deemed a jeopardizing investment. And therefore, for foundations that are interested in investing in some of these more creative opportunities, falling within the safe harbor of the PRI rules is an important protection against possible risk exposure from the jeopardizing investment rules. So, what constitutes a PRI? There are three basic criteria. First, the primary purpose of the investment is to accomplish one or more charitable purposes. Second, there should be no significant purpose of the investment to produce income or result in the appreciation of property. And third, no purpose whatsoever of the investment should be to accomplish political or lobbying objectives. That third prong usually is the easiest to satisfy. We're not going to spend much time on that today, but let's talk a little bit about the first two elements of that PRI test. So under the regulations, what constitutes a primary purpose of an investment being charitable? Regulations explain that this means that the programmatic benefit of the investment significantly furthers the charitable or other 501c3 activities and purposes of the organization. And that, of course, lends itself to a somewhat subjective analysis, both on the quantitative and qualitative scales, about what constitutes a significant furtherance of charitable purposes. But that's the lens through which an organization should analyze a potential PRI. And furthermore, the regulations explain that the investment's primary purpose is charitable only if the organization can demonstrate that the investment would not have been made but for the relationship between the investment and the organization's charitable objectives. Which, said differently, and this really leads to the next element under the test, that the potential economic benefits of the organization take somewhat of a back seat to the programmatic benefits, that the primary purpose has to be charitable. When coming to the next element of the test, no significant purpose to produce income or result in appreciation of property, the law looks at the question of, well, what about other investors? If other investors who are solely seeking economic benefits would invest in the same opportunity, then that suggests that there probably is a significant purpose to produce income. Conversely, if the investment is less attractive to purely profit-driven investors, the organization will have an easier time satisfying this prong. What's important to note is that the fact that an investment in the end actually winds up being economically beneficial is not in and of itself held against the organization. The eventual outcome of the investment, it doesn't go into the analysis of whether an investment was a PRI. We really only look at it from the time at which the investment was made. As we said, qualifying an investment as a PRI offers several benefits. First, under the jeopardizing investment rules, it's insulated from that liability. Furthermore, a PRI counts towards the foundation's annual distribution obligation. It's 5% requirement under the qualifying distribution rules. And finally, a PRI will not constitute a taxable expenditure, although it's important to note that for private foundations, expenditure responsibility, sort of oversight and due diligence with respect to the PRI needs to be exercised in order to avoid taxable expenditure status. Now, the regulations offer several very enlightening examples, and we don't have time to go through all of them. I've summarized some of them here. And these examples actually came out in two stages. The original ones go back to when the private foundation rules were introduced late 1960s, early 1970s. And there are several examples that date back to that time. And then in 2012, the IRS updated those examples with some additional ones to further capture the broadening spectrum of the ways in which PRIs are used. Again, based on time, we don't have the opportunity to go through them in detail, but particularly against the backdrop of the topic that we're discussing today, several of those examples do involve investments in urban contexts where the foundation has an opportunity, whether through a debt investment or an equity investment, to participate in urban renewal efforts. Just in closing, and apologize, I'm going to skip through some of the next slides that go through some of these examples in greater detail. The IRS recently issued a different set of guidance pertaining to mission-related investments. And what's interesting here is that mission-related investments in the IRS's classification are not PRIs because there is a significant profit motive. So you wouldn't necessarily satisfy some of those elements of the PRI test because the foundation acknowledges that it's entering into this investment, at least in part, because it thinks it has a good chance of reaping an economic return. But at the same time, there's a programmatic motivation as well. And on one hand, you might think, well, that's great. It's the best of both worlds. Economic and programmatic benefits are aligning. What could possibly be wrong? But the IRS raises an interesting question, sort of a question of whether the charity gets whipsawed by these competing considerations. Because once the charity is investing for economic benefit, does it then have to, or the question is, would the organization be better off to avoid the socially conscious investment and simply swing for the fences on the economic side and invest in the investment that offers the best economic return? Would the board's fiduciary duty to maximize the assets of the organization compel it somehow to forego the socially conscious investment simply to maximize return? And the IRS, in a notice issued just a few weeks ago, answered that question, no, that the organization really can balance both of these factors, and that what we look at is that the foundation managers should take all factors into account, and in the words of the IRS, they should consider all relevant facts and circumstances, including the relationship between a particular investment and the foundation's charitable purposes. And really, just in closing, this applies not only to private foundations, but to all organizations, that organizational leadership should exercise, again, to use the IRS's words, the requisite ordinary business care and prudence within the situation to make decisions that provide a good beneficial return to the organization under all measures, both economic and programmatic. And in terms of a takeaway, when an organization has a decision to make, how to devote its assets, how to make the most meaningful impact, we've certainly seen today from both what Tracy and Otis mentioned, there are numerous creative ways to get involved, and the tax rules certainly allow foundations to be creative and to take a leadership role in making a difference in our communities.
Thank you. We have a few minutes left, about 10 minutes left, and we again welcome you to use the chat feature on your screen to pose any questions. We'll start with a question. I'm going to give it to Tracy. Question is whether to expand on some of the challenges associated with the new market tax credit program. So Tracy, I'm going to make this one yours, so go ahead.
I'm happy to start it off, although I am not an attorney, so one of the attorneys might also like to comment on this. From where I sit, providing a guarantee for the new market tax credit program wasn't dramatically different from defining that charitability requirement, which is something that we have to do as a PRI. And you make the case for what that charitability is and document it appropriately. The challenge on the guarantees that we did is that the new market tax credit program is very complex, and the documentation that it took to put everything into place and the time it took to put everything into place was pretty substantial. I want to say that the first tax credit project that we did had a closing binder of close to 400 pages. So it's not, and so there's that to consider. I think the thing that further complicated, particularly that first transaction, is that we had a reimbursement agreement. So we guaranteed the tax credits. We guaranteed the recapture. So if EBDI defaulted, the tax credit investors would have to repay those benefits that they had gotten up to that point, and that was the piece that was the additional guarantee. And then we had an agreement that said if we actually had to pay out against that guarantee, we could look to EBDI to repay us for that capital. So those were all of the things that required a fairly substantial amount of documentation.
But if somebody takes the prerogative of moderating, if they ask you a question, that's sort of been that I hear a lot, which is a lot of I hear it from both businesses and from foundations and philanthropic groups. They're saying, look, we've been funding programs in the city forever. And all the money we put in and all the programs we funded, and look where we are now. We come with a summer of unrest and difficulty in this. Are we missing something? Is there something new? Is there a new dynamic? Is there something that we should be, that from your perspective, as someone who's on the ground, is there something we should be doing how do we respond to that question, I guess?
I think it's a good question. It's a reasonable question. And I'll respond in a way that I hope doesn't prevent any of the philanthropic community from being supportive in the future. But I will say this, both looking at it from when I served on the public side and as an economic developer on the nonprofit side trying to support a city, it's often frustrating when the philanthropic community won't commit for the long haul, right? The challenges of our inner cities are not will not be resolved in a two-year cycle, not even the one election cycle. And so nonprofits often find themselves chasing after the dollars of what's important this season. So everyone is, the philanthropic community is all over public safety. And so all of a sudden, all of the nonprofits, everyone is thinking about public safety. And then two or 3 years later, it's about the environment, or 2 or 3 years later after that, it's about education. And so I think that's part of the challenge, is making a commitment, I would say a place-based investment commitment that says, you know what, this challenge has existed for decades, and at the minimum, we are going to hunker down and say, for the next 10 years, or at least for the next 8 years, give me 2 election cycles at least, right? But for the next 8 to 10 years, we are going to invest, and we're going to monitor and evaluate and learn from those investments. And we're going to make sure that the participation, not just grass tops, but the grassroots participation is there for the long haul. What I'm excited about in terms of some of the work in Newark is our opportunity to do some of that, right? If we can, what's happening downtown, what's happening in the neighborhoods through the Model Neighborhoods Initiative it's not pie in the sky, and it's comprehensive enough that I feel like we're getting the appropriate response from the philanthropic community that this strategic investment has to be a comprehensive and long-term investment, and judge us on whether we are learning and growing and seeing outcomes from that investment. And don't change your minds too quickly.
Terrific. We probably have time for maybe one more question, or if anyone, I'm looking at if you want to use the chat feature, we're happy to answer one or two more questions. Good. Well, I want to thank you for joining us this afternoon. I want to specifically thank our speakers, and I want to thank the Forum of Regional Area Grantmakers for being such a great partner. I'm going to ask, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask one more question, then I'll have some final thoughts on distribution of materials. The question is, what is the benefit of working with the CNJG as opposed to individual funders? I think what they're saying is as opposed to, or if you want to take that as a...
And I'm assuming you're talking about the Council of New Jersey Grantmakers. Well, I think the benefit there is the economies of scale, right, that you have a number of funders who are united, who are communicating with each other, who are looking at how to really leverage their dollars collectively to have that kind of impact that I talked about earlier in the places that they're serving. Now, saying that, obviously, we will take support from individual foundations as well, but there is a great benefit, I think, to working as a team and approaching some of these really complex problems that plague our cities.
Good. Well, the presentation materials will be shared online and will be provided to all of you in an email tomorrow, along with a recording of this webinar. We also, believe it or not, at Vanderbilt maintain a YouTube channel, and you can catch it there. Your kids will think you're cool. You can catch it there too. So, again, we want to thank you all today, and with that, we'll shut down the line. But you have our an email and phone numbers, I think, for the speakers, and I think you feel how to reach out to them if you like. So, thank you all very much.